Hello, Irini. It is a great pleasure to have you as a guest at the Mandala Center Milano podcast. And Irini Rockwell is a long-time Buddhist student and Dharma teacher. She is the founder of the Five Wisdom Institutes, of which she will speak soon. And she's the author of two important books. The first one, entitled The Five Wisdom Energies, was published in 2002 and has been translated in 10 languages so far. And the second one, Natural Brilliance, came out in 2012. So Irini, my first question for you is, would you tell us something about your personal story and the paths of life that you have crossed before the days of the Five Wisdoms Institute, including your professional trainer as a dancer, from what I know?
Okay, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for hosting this, Tommaso. So I'll start with my life as a dancer, because it is actually pretty significant in terms of my whole relationship to the Five Wisdom Energies. I started when I was 8 years old in the US, and then I was living in Turkey because my father was a doctor there. And so I trained there and became the soloist at the little studio there, trained by people who are from, the Royal Ballet in England. So very professional training. And then I was sent to the boarding school in Tring, Hertfordshire in England. And I was there for 2 years, and I did the whole English schoolgirl thing. We wore hairnets, and we had our uniform, and we curtsied to our teachers. And it was, I was the prefect of our form, and I got excellent training, world-class training, and then went to the London branch and continued my education also in the English style of general certificate exams. And then I went to Juilliard. I auditioned for Juilliard and got in. And I think that whole trajectory of very consistent training brought out two things in my personality that are significant, I would say. One is discipline. I have tremendous discipline, and the other is appreciating excellence. And so I try to do things in the best way possible. So, but I was pretty uptight by the end of all of that, particularly 7 years in London and New York City, in just trying to just dance my ass off and get approval and pass exams and all that. And then I was married at the time. I got married in there, and we moved to Berkeley, California. Totally different scene. Mm-hmm. It really was a great combination of kind of loosening me up. So I had the discipline, I had the perfectionism, but then in Berkeley, the first company I got involved with is we called Open Arts, and it was very experimental. We danced in the streets, and it was just really wonderful. We did proscenium arch, in theaters too, but we danced in the streets and did all those. This was the early 70s, 1970s. So, yes. It was very influenced by hippies and, mm-hmm. Coming into one's own. So the second company I started was called Footloose, and it still exists under different directorship. All these, from a lifetime ago. So basically, what happened in Berkeley is a tremendous flowering, blooming of my creativity. There was less sense of discipline, just much more sense of just enjoying the world of creativity and dance. And I had some exceptional people I collaborated with too. We really had a lot of fun in the early 1970s, being in the dance scene, so to speak. There, I also sort of had a breakdown because I had been so tight, and I met with a Tibetan Buddhist teacher, Tartang Tulku Rinpoche, and he's of the Nyingma lineage. And I started to be very influenced by Tibetan teachings. So then I made a transition. You could go on with the next question if you'd like.
Yeah, I was wondering, when did you meet Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who was your root teacher, and what was your experience of him?
Yeah, so I was invited to teach at Naropa Institute in Boulder, Colorado in 1976. It had been started in 1974. They expected 400 people and they got 2,000. So literally people were camping in parking lots. I mean, it was a zoo. By the time I got there in 76, it was a little bit less of a zoo, but there was still just a lot of people who were interested in spirituality and, the arts, etc. So that's where I met him and started to take teachings with him in 1976.
Yeah.
He had an amazing presence, and it was mysterious at the same time as being very direct. I've had the opportunity to toast him on several occasions, and once I said he wasn't a man, he was a phenomenon. I mean, what he created was amazing. He created a global community. He had many, many practices, not just traditional Buddhist practices, but also practices that he adopted from Japanese culture and Japanese Buddhism, etc. So he was very inquisitive, very creative. And frankly, I didn't understand, and still don't, in some sense, all of his teachings. But I remember the moment in the parking lot before going into the next teaching when I had this realization, I have no idea what's going on here, but I trust it.
Yeah.
I just felt, yes, this is where I need to be. I trusted him and I trusted the community, even though, everybody, it was the early 70s. Everybody was sleeping with everybody. And, it's like, it was rich. It was very rich.
Yeah. And this led to your years at the Naropa University, in the Naropa environment. What was that like?
Yeah. Well, as I said, I went there to teach for the first time in 1976. That was in the summer. And by 1979, I was invited to head the dance movement therapy department. And the faculty there were on the cutting edge of thinking, spiritual exploration, and creativity. So it was extremely stimulating to be there. It's like you had lots of interesting input from other people. There were collaborations that were going on. And I just thrived. I continue to thrive as someone who's very creative. But I became more interested in creativity in my students, and I helped them along that way. But then I finally realized that I was more interested in them as people rather than their artistic ability. I'd have meditation sessions with them because most everybody at Naropa meditated, or at least were sort of included to meditate, whether they did it much or not. And in talking to these students, I realized I was getting tears in my eyes when they would say something, and that there had been this sort of visceral connection with them. And I went, wow, this is very touching. This is very moving. I should move into working with people, not just dance, creativity, etc. So that was a life-changing realization. And I realized that my colleagues who were doing, like those in contemplative psychotherapy, for instance, that's what they were doing, that they were working with people. So I took the MA in contemplative psychotherapy. And for the last years I was at Naropa, I did both, was head of the department, undergraduate dance and dance studies, you know, again, a very creative environment. And I also was doing the MA in contemplative psychotherapy. I left Naropa to become head of practice and education at Karma Choling, which is a Shambhala retreat and meditation center. So I was head of practice and education, and I worked very closely with people with their practice and their study, not only in the Karma Choling itself with the staff. There were 50 staff there that lived. We lived with 50 people. And I went with my husband, my daughter, who was 6 at the time. And I also was responsible for a group of the East Coast meditation centers. There were about, I don't know, 30 or 40 meditation centers that I also would reach out to and consult with, etc. So it was a big job. It was a big job. And I really loved living in community. And one of the things I did there was establish the five rooms. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but we created the 5 wisdoms rooms.
Yeah, okay. Given you mentioned contemplative psychotherapy, would you like to say a few words more about where do you think it's developing today, if it is developing at all, as a school of psychotherapy?
Sorry about that. Well, of course, it started at Naropa University.
Yeah.
And I'll say a little bit more about that later. But and I'm not up to date, particularly with the department at Naropa right now. But absolutely, my MA in contemplative psychotherapy is the foundation for how I work with people. And I went on to found Karuna Training, co-founded it with another person. And I worked with Karuna Training for the first 3 years. I wrote all the curriculum. I trained people in depth. I would go I was living in Halifax, Nova Scotia at that time. And I would go to lead those trainings, 4 or 5 times a year in Europe. It was started in Germany. It's now spread. And then I left there after 3 or 4 years. And then I started the Five Wisdomn Insitute. And I'll say more about that later. And the Five Wisdoms trainings. So contemplative psychotherapy is both in Karuna Training. It's also the foundation for the Five Wisdoms training I do at the Institute, my institute. And I've also led and co-led and sponsored others who do contemplative psychotherapy. Like when I was at Karma Choling, I would host Jeff Fortuna, people like that. Yeah, yes, I know you have. So it's kind of been the core of how I work with people, and both in trainings and coaching.
Okay. Whereas, what was the Maitri space awareness and how was it born?
Well, this is a very interesting story, actually. In the early 1970s, Trungpa Rinpoche introduced the Buddha families in a way to make them accessible to non-Buddhists, to anybody off the street. He was very good friends with Zen teacher Shinryo Suzuki Roshi. And they were talking about this initial idea. And they felt that things have moved along incredibly. But at that time, early 70s, they thought traditional sitting meditation was too challenging for people, particularly people who were overly emotionally disturbed or confused. And they wanted to find a way of working with Westerners that would not be imposing sitting meditation. Of course, now, many moons later, sitting meditation, mindfulness meditation is mainstream. So things have evolved tremendously. Anyway, Suzuki Roshi died, unfortunately, in the midst of those discussions. But there was an event that actually was that crystallized how Trungpa Rinpoche was going to work with people. And it happened in a hotel room at a party. And there was one person creating a scene, acting out and singing and trying to get everybody else involved. And Rinpoche noticed that the energy got more and more intense, and the room actually became claustrophobic. And he realized that, oh, we are in a box and it's becoming colored by a particular energy. And it reminded him of a traditional Tibetan Buddhist practice of doing a solitary retreat in a completely dark room. Okay, we don't do the dark room, but we do have that sense of sort of being boxed in, you could say. So he started making drawing diagrams of rooms, each one its own color and window shape, and that practitioners were to lie in the posture, and the combination of the space you're in, the color, and the posture evokes and intensifies one of the 5 basic energy patterns. That is the practice. And it allows you to work through the neurosis and find the wisdom or sanity inherent in each of the energies. So that is the power of the 5 wisdom. And any teachings I do using the postures, I feel I can relax. The postures are going to teach people. They are going to have their neurosis come up, and I'll be working with them to
transform them.
Transmute is the word we use, but I go through all levels of, letting go, which is, basic sitting meditation says, let go. Then you move into more sense of unconditional friendliness, embracing your energy. And then finally, in the 5 wisdoms practice, what we do is we transmute. We don't turn apples into oranges, but we find within the orange the essence, the absolute purity of the energy, which is your wisdom. So like on the cover of my my book, it says, an engaging and insightful exploration of the light of wisdom within the darkness of confusion. Mm. So for me, this was life transformative, and also transformative was in early 1976. I was sitting in, when I was in Boulder, and I was reading through Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, which is one of Trungpa Rinpoche's, seminal books. And I'm just going to read this, because what he said was, quote, in the Tantric tradition, energy is categorized in 5 basic qualities or Buddha families. Each has an emotion associated with it, which is transmuted into a particular wisdom or aspect of awakened state of mind. They are also associated with colors, elements, landscapes, directions, seasons, with any aspect of the phenomenal world. Unquote. So my immediate connection came from my life, as I sort of said earlier, as a choreographer and dancer. I knew about energy. That's what I worked with. There's different choreographers. For instance, the ballet choreographer Balanchine was very more abstract. Mm-hmm. My teacher at Juilliard, Anthony Tudor, also created dances that were very much based in emotion, which was revolutionary, actually, for ballet to have that amount of sort of emotional context for the choreography. Uh-huh. So I knew how to express the heat of love, the strength of anger, pride, joy. So what happened is that reading that passage from Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, I realized I had discovered a contemplative tradition with an understanding of energy at its core. Yeah. So it acknowledged the inherent sanity and richness of my art discipline. Like, I didn't have to be, artists are very narcissistic, I have to say. That was one thing I wanted to get away from. I just, the narcissism of being an artist, that actually, the joy of being able to think of someone else, that gives you such enjoyment. Mm-hmm. And by that time, I was also, coming into, in the Buddhist tradition, taking a bodhisattva vow, which is a vow that basically you vow to put others before yourself. So this all was sort of combined, with my Buddhist practices and dancing and wanting to work with others, etc. So, yeah.
Brilliant. And so that was the first seed of the Five Wisdomn Institute, and myself and our listeners really looking forward to hearing more from you about him.
Yeah. So
dedicated to the cause of the Five Wisdomn Institute.
Yeah, exactly. You got it. So how the Institute itself was born, it came about in 2002 when my first book came out. Mm-hmm. And I realized that I was presenting the Five Wisdom's energies in a way that wasn't available anywhere. I realized that I needed to teach in the way that Trungpa Rinpoche taught, which is making esoteric Buddhism accessible to the man or woman on the street. So now it's in its 20th years, the Institute, and it's much evolved. I went through 3 phases with it. The first was teaching here, there, and everywhere. I had my book, and I was like, you know, throughout Europe, some in Asia, and I just kept going from weekend to weekend. And I realized that there was something really missing in what I wanted to do. I was just doing like laying these seeds and did not have a vehicle, a container for those seeds to actually come to fruition. So the second phase was creating an in-depth personal and professional development training. And that came about in 2006. And I started because I taught in Europe so much, there was a lot of people in Europe. So I started in Amsterdam and Paris. I jumped across the pond, so they say, and had the audacity to do this, very esoteric teaching in two major cities in Europe. And they completed, and actually somebody from the Netherlands took them on, and I actually did 3 cycles of the training at his center in the Netherlands. The third phase, which is where we are now, is teacher training to authorized teachers. Again, I've come to the place in my life where I feel I hold a lot of riches, a lot of ways through writing 2 books and creating trainings, and the year-long training is 6 modules. It had started out with 8 modules, now it's 6, so we've condensed it a bit. Runs for a year, pretty much. And each of the modules, of the 6 modules, also has a workbook. So I've done writings specifically for that particular topic of that training. And the training, they actually, when they put the subtitle in the Five Wisdom Energies book, that became key as to what to bring out in my trainings: personality, emotions, and relationships. So those are the names of those are the topics of the first 3 modules. In the second series, which I call the professional development, it's about finding life purpose, how to engage effectively, and creating a fieldwork project where you show that your 6 module training can be effective in your work, whether it's being a therapist or a CEO or whatever, as well as, and then also I train teachers after they've graduated. So the other thing that's happened here in its 20th year is that I convened a 5 Wisdoms Council. There are 5 members on it, and they have been exemplary in coming up with ideas about how to take the 5 wisdoms into the world. 3 of them are in teacher training as we speak, and anyway, they really have come along, and I'm just delighted. And the other initiative is creating a 5 Wisdoms international community, online community, where people can make connections and have peer collaborations, and all sorts of interactions can happen. The basic thrust for me this year has been to pass it along. And I'm very interested in having my teachers teach and, helping them. And they are now. There's, a couple in Warsaw, actually, one in Tenerife, Spain, and then a couple in the USA. They're just really getting in there and teaching, and I am amazed at their, well, for one thing, the differences in their styles in teaching. One of them is very, I'm going to go into the energies in a minute, but one has a lot of Vajra energy, and they is just extremely can simplify and clarify and get to the point. And another one has a lot of Ratna energy, and she's just so creative and bringing in energies. And another person brings in a lot of somatic understanding, working with the elements.
Yeah.
So because my training is so diverse, I've managed to invite a lot of diversity in how to teach. And the bottom line is that we teach experientially. We don't do a lot of didactic, what I call the Vajra download, where I know and I'm going to tell you. That is a style of teaching that I did for many years, but I don't do that now. It's one of the reasons I write books and have a workbook, so the didactic stuff is there, and then the training itself is interactive. And I bring in a lot of the exercises from my books, etc. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds really amazing. If one looks up the website of the Wisdom 5 Institute, as I strongly recommend to do, you find in the stated mission of the Institute these words, I quote, to promote the practices and teachings of the five wisdoms founded in Tantric Buddhism. So can you explain what this means?
How many hours do you have?
Yeah. Many as you
Well,
want.
yeah. Well, this is really key to my current work with my current book, and I'll tell you that in a minute. But basically, Tantric Buddhism emphasizes embodied practice and understanding from an experiential point of view rather than a cognitive perspective. In other words, much of Buddhism is taught cognitively. And what I'm trying to do, and I think is more and more in mainstream educational spheres, is experiential learning. So my emphasis on embodied wisdom and learning through experience are what the five wisdom energies are all about. So the teachings and practices of the five wisdoms are an exemplary way to bring about an understanding of Tantric Buddhism and vice versa. And Tantric Buddhism is the underpinnings of the five wisdom energies. So Tibetan Buddhism is a very complex, in-depth study of bringing about awakened mind. And you do the Trungpa Rinpoche presented it in what we call three yanas, three vehicles. The beginning vehicle is basic coming to simplicity and working with yourself. The Mahayana, the second vehicle, is having sort of come to some more sense of transparency about your own personality and need to have an agenda, and you start relating to other people with a warm heart. Then there's the Vajrayana, and it has various levels of Vajrayana, but for our purposes, the most important level are the last two, Mahamudra and Mahāti, or Dzogchen, also called. Yeah. And they are very much about embodied wisdom, energetic understanding, not only in yourself, but in the phenomenal world. And that is why the five wisdoms are so really key to understanding this, because traditional Buddhism takes a long, long time. You go through these different levels, and it took me 10 years to get to the more esoteric teachings. And a lot of in this day and age, again, Buddhism has evolved tremendously. And in our time now, a lot of teachers of Tantric Buddhism will introduce students a lot earlier.
Okay. There's one point that I'm really interested in amongst the things you said, and that's the one about the wisdom and the neuroses of each energy. Can you say more about that?
Absolutely. So I'll give you a little description of each and how each is transmuted. Okay, so the Vajra family, the essence of the Vajra's family is clarity. It reflects a blue energy. Its energy is blue, its image is a crystal clear mirror that's not stained at all.
Uh-huh.
It reflects what it sees without any bias. It just goes, look, clear mirror, this is where it is. So that's its wisdom quality, being able to be absolutely clear and seeing things as they are. However, it gets stuck by saying, I'm clear, I'm right. That makes you wrong. Sorry. And so it's very self-righteous and can harden into like a cold or hot, sometimes cold, sometimes hot anger. That is its neurosis and confused quality. It can be extremely dogmatic and authoritarian, and be pretty sharp and critical.
Aggressive.
Okay. Yep. Yep. So what you do with each of these energies, interestingly, to transmute them, is you stop being so self-identified.
Okay.
It's not my energy, it's self-existing energy. And the catalyst, the word we use, and its definition is Maitri. Maitri is unconditional loving kindness. And once you create unconditional loving kindness in yourself, you have liberated yourself from this burden of a constricted, limiting ego. And you are in its wisdom. So a typical example is, for instance, is that if someone's coming to you with aggression and anger, and you just stay there, and you see that that person actually has a tremendous amount of clarity in their aggression. And you say, wow, you're very clear about this. It stops the battle, nothing left. You have empowered them. You've empowered them. You've acknowledged their wisdom.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's can happen. Let's go on to the next one. The Ratna family exudes a rich and earthy golden yellow energy, and it encompasses everything. It's so that quality, its major quality is a sense of richness and abundance, and that creates a sense of equanimity and utter satisfaction. There's nowhere else to go. You're just totally satisfied. However, this one starts to feel like all the richness is out there and I've got nothing. And it can be get incredibly greedy and territoriality. And then it gets into a puffed up pride, like, okay, I've got everything. And you've got nothing, and it accumulates. It gets the third car and the yacht and the big home, and it's just so attached to securing a sense of substantiality. And that's what makes it neurotic. And there are, well, many people like that. Many people like the blue quality too. Okay, the next one is the Padma family, and it is about vitality, and it glows with red energy. It's passion at its best. It's compassionate wisdom. It has a tremendous sense of empathy and wanting to be in an authentic relationship, not just glib answers, but just really get to the essence of who someone is and how you can yourself can be authentically expressive. So it's the world of teachers who adore their students and students adore them. There are many wonderful like movies about teachers who've like overcome terrible obstacles in their schools because they care so much about their students. Or therapists. Therapists have to have that empathic aspect of who they are. So in its neurosis, it clings obsessively to what gives pleasure. And that's its downfall. And to transmute that, again, you dissolve the fact that I need this or I need you to make me happy, to give me pleasure. You come into this sense in the Padma energy that you're your own best friend. You love yourself, therefore others love you, and you love others. It's a great deal. But it's really can be extremely hard for people when they're obsessively seeking entertainment and pleasure and getting, having a bad hair day because their coiffure isn't right, or I can't get on my internet and watch my favorite show. It's like we're obsessed with this pleasure seeking. So that's its downfall. The last one is the karma energy, and it emits a green energy, and it's swift and energetic and all accomplishing. And it's all accomplishing for the benefit of others in its wisdom. It really wants to do what is good in the world. But it can become power hungry, manipulative, competitive, envious, and basically want all the control, wanting to be top dog, extremely paranoid. It's real neurosis. It's paranoid. Someone else is going to, get the promotion or the raise or the blah, blah, whatever. And it's our society is like full of this energy too, full of this energy. So the last one is the Buddha family energy. It's white and it's spacious and peaceful. It's the sense of all pervasive, peaceful space, and that there's not a ruffle of any disturbance or distraction, and it's just you're there. However, that can get so much. You can get sort of immobile with the density of ignoring and denying what's around you. So that withdrawal of the Buddha energy is its neurosis. It doesn't want to see, hear. It's blind, deaf, and dumb. And that's its protection from, sort of the wildness of our world. So I just want to say that the primary practice is, as I said previously, is transmuting intensified emotions into the five wisdoms.
Right.
That's a primary practice of the training. And the fruition of the training is having five available wisdoms in your day. I call it the daily five.
Okay.
So every day there's some sense of you brought some white energy by maybe doing sitting meditation. You've brought karma energy by doing your work. You've made a nice meal for yourself, which is Ratna energy. So having the five wisdoms available in their wisdom and having a balance of the five in your day, that is the fruition of the training that I do. I mean, there's many more things we could say, but that's, yeah.
Well, that was really amazing. Thank you so much. It's interesting how, as you were speaking, I could definitely have in mind a few examples of people that I know for each energy and each color. Very fascinating.
So I just want to say that one of the new offerings I have, actually, I mean, the first module of the five wisdoms is basically discovering your wisdom energies, but I'm also teaching like a 5-session. This is going to be really fun. It's going to be a 5-session course in which I invite panelists to represent each energy. So there'll be, say, 3 panelists, and those panelists that day will talk from Vajra.
Right.
And then the next time we'll do Ratna, and I'll gather, I have lots of students who would probably volunteer to be on and represent, one of the families. So, and then there'll be a discussion and people ask questions. It'll be on Zoom. People ask questions so they can kind of hone in a little bit into what their energy style is. I think the most important thing to say, however, with the five wisdoms is it's not really a typology, though you start there. You start by identifying the five in you. But basically, the idea, as I just said, is to have the five wisdoms in your life, all five wisdoms available to you. So then, when they're all available to you, no matter, you don't go from your, this is important, you don't go from your own agenda, your own egoic agenda. You go from what is needed here.
Yes.
And then you turn on Vajra, you turn on Ratna. So that's called five wisdoms activity, or five Buddha activity. It's wisdom activity.
Okay. This really reminds me of when Jung wrote Psychological Types, that he said the most important point is not to understand your type, but to develop what you don't have, like your
there you go.
Yeah. You have written, as we mentioned earlier, 2 major books on this project, The Five Wisdoms, Energies, and Natural Brilliance. Can you present them briefly to us, and then we'll invite the listeners to buy them?
Okay. So a friend of mine said, why don't you write a book? So, okay. I was a dancer. I don't write, I dance, but then I was a therapist by that time, or, working with people. But there are many books written on what are traditionally called the 5 Buddha families. Trungpa Rinpoche also called them the 5 wisdom energies. So we've used those as a little bit more accessible words. So those writings on the Buddha families tend to be very traditional approach, more religious. And I wanted to make these teachings accessible to anyone. And at first, we weren't even going to mention Buddhism anywhere in the book. And then the Shambhala publication said, 5 wisdom energies, a Buddhist way of understanding personalities, emotions, and relationships. And I went, well, okay, things had evolved, so again, things had evolved, and mentioning Buddhism was more okay. But because Trungpa Rinpoche, his hallmark is making esoteric teachings accessible, that is what I follow in. And so that was what I was trying to do with that book. And that book, as you mentioned, it's in 10 languages. You can give it to your grandmother or your colleague or your daughter, and it all, it's accessible. It's by people's nights. It's on people's nightstand. It's under the Christmas tree. It's available. The second book, Natural Brilliance, is very influenced by contemporary modalities in working with people. I had gone through the Authentic Leadership Certificate at Naropa University. It was a university by that time. And, many ways of how to bring people more in a more sane way into work situations. So I took these modalities and Five Wisdomized them. I like, for instance, an example is nonviolent communication. Nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg's work. And he had 4 steps to that communication process. I added a 5th, which is Buddha energy, which Buddha energy is not that accessible to most people in the Western world. So anyway, those are the kinds of tweaks I made. And that book is one of the major sources for the professional development training, because there's just a plethora of exercises, how to work with emotions in the workplace, versus what you would do with your partner, how to become more authentic, how to create. There's a practice I do, an interpersonal practice, where you basically really enter someone's world so you know them before you can give advice or work with them. So it's basically used by it's used by my students as well as students like it. Both these books are, my students have them. They're at several departments at Naropa University. They've even been at Harvard because a friend was teaching there. And then Karuna training, etc. So, they've been circulating. The book I'm working on now is called The Five Wisdoms of Tantric Buddhism. This is my PhD. This is like, oh boy, it's a lot of work, because I don't want to go in again to traditional presentation of Tantric Buddhism, but more come to the essence, what is absolutely fundamental to understanding Tantra. So it takes a lot of going through like 30, 40 years of material I've collected as a Buddhist practitioner, Tibetan Buddhist, Tantric Buddhist, Vajrayana Buddhist, those are all synonymous, and trying to hone in on what I want to say. It's in 4 parts. The first part is really more about getting to know who you are through the 5 wisdoms. The second part is introducing Tantric Buddhism in many aspects. Like there's a whole chapter on the feminine and masculine, which are really key in understanding Tantric Buddhism. And the third section is all about the inner journey of actualizing, filled with practices. And the fourth part is 5 wisdoms in action, bring it into the world. That's the trajectory of my training, you could say, how to start with who you are, what are the contexts, etc., and then bring it into the world. because if we don't, and so that's what, you know, my institute is trying to do. It's trying to be this beacon of energy that radiates the five wisdoms.
Yeah. And when will it come out? Do you know already, or
No.
few years or month?
I'd say I'd probably finish writing it in a year, and then it maybe in another year it'll come out. So yeah, it's what do you kind of it just it's frustrating that, because I'm dying to tell people about, you know, what I'm writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I might do a class on some of the chapters at some point, where people to get a sense of where my mind is. I've already sent the feminine and masculine chapter to several people. I've presented that in a study group. And the other one is the mandala principle, which is also a very key to the five wisdoms mandala. And I now have on mandala principle, you know, basic understanding of mandala, the outer mandala of phenomena, the inner mandala of experience, and then the five wisdom mandala of how the five wisdoms are key to understanding mandala principle.
Right, that's really amazing. Are you not traveling to London or to Europe soon to give one of your teachings?
I'm only if invited.
Okay.
I mean,
Rightly.
Basically, COVID, I was traveling extensively. I mean, a lot. And then COVID hit, and and I was teaching locally. Now I live in California. I was teaching locally here too. Then COVID hit, and it dried everything up. And I have not, what can I say? I've not re-engaged with places who might be interested in having me teach in wherever. Right now, my main focus, as I said, is these online teachings, and I've got a lot of new offerings for 2023. People should definitely look at the website, get on my mailing list, whatever you want to do. And my book. So my online trainings and working on the book, my primary focuses on. So I'm not intending to do like a big trip anywhere. I mean, I had to cancel things when COVID came along, like everybody did.
Yeah.
But I feel extremely fortunate that I can actually, I never thought it was possible, but you can actually transmit a lot of the teachings very successfully through this online format.
Yeah.
I've learned how to do that.
Yeah, and also that made possible for us to meet today.
Yes.
I think we have reached the end of our time together, but I want to thank you so much for generously sharing all your experiences and knowledge. So thank you very much, Irini.
Well, thank you, Tommaso. Thank you so much for inviting me. And let's see how much we can have this particular video radiate out into the world.
Try our best.